81 rebellion, which called for an EU referendum. One might have expected you'd have been campaigning for out.
Well, the fact is the majority of people in this country have never had a say in the European issue. They weren't born in 1975, or they were born but weren't old enough to vote. And it was absolutely right that we should have a referendum, and I campaigned for that.
Right, and you think from a security point of view we're better in the EU. Why?
Absolutely. The fact is that this is a time for Europe to stand together rather than divide on the issues of security. But I have to say, I saw the comments earlier by Ian Duncan-Smith, who I've got a huge amount of respect for, great reforming welfare minister. But I think he's wrong to suggest that we have open borders. We're not part of the Schengen Agreement, as Michael Fallon has already said. And the Paris attacks, the majority, certainly 8 of them, were EU nationals. And in fact, the leader of the Paris attack was a Belgian national. And as Frank Gardner alluded to there, the attack in 7/7 in this country, 3 of them were British and 1 was German. So yes, we have to guard our borders from external threats, but we have a homegrown threat, and the government is taking action to deal with that. But I think it's absolutely wrong to suggest that we have open borders. We don't. And secondly, absolutely wrong to suggest, it's a very bold statement to suggest if the public vote to leave the European Union, that we will be safe from terrorism. I think that's a very, very bold statement to make. Can
anyone really make that sort of statement? Was Ian Duncan-Smith right or wrong to actually imply that we will be at more threat if we stay in the EU from terrorism?
Well, we're a growing threat, we know that, and it's not right to say that we don't have open borders, because although we're not in the Schengen area, all the Schengen areas is that there are no border checks within the Schengen area group of countries. But a European citizen wants to come to the EU, wants to come to the UK, then we have open borders. There's nothing we can do to stop that European citizen coming.
Right. No, not an EU citizen coming through, but we do have border checks, obviously, in France, don't we, at the moment?
Yes,
and
we have
could be under threat if we pulled out of the EU.
Well, how can your border checks be at threat if you're actually an independent country? We had, if you come over on the Eurostar at the moment, you'll find very, very seldom is anybody checked as they come off the Eurostar. And of course, we had this problem of people getting on at Lille and bypassing the checks that go on at Brussels and Paris, for example. But if we control our borders, then we can put in what checks are appropriate for us.
Listening to Frank Gardner, he said the most important security arrangements are the bilateral agreements that we have with other countries, not necessarily our membership of the EU. So what do you say to that?
What I think Frank was also right to say is we have to be careful not to conflate the issue of asylum seekers and immigration and migration from within the European Union with the wider security issue. And the fact is, I think I've concluded over the period of the last few months, as somebody who sat on the committee mentioned previously on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, that our security is best served by, yes, our transatlantic relationship, but also being the counterbalance to France and Germany's domination of security policy, of foreign policy, of diplomacy. If we were to leave the European Union, this is really a question for Gerard, you know, if the British people vote to leave the European Union, do you agree that that would put France and Germany in a more dominant place in Europe?
Well, if you don't think particularly Germany is in a dominant position now, then you should spend some more time in the European Parliament.
No, I'm not saying that. It's a pretty simple question. I'm saying, do you think that France and Germany would be more dominant if Britain leaves?
I don't see why the corollary of that is that Britain is somehow weaker for being an independent nation, which we were for the 1,000 years before we joined the European Union.
But is it a counter? I think that's the question. Is Britain a counter to German and French dominance?
No, I think that it's very much a German project. The Germans pay the vast amount of the budget. They are the biggest contributors to the budget, and you've seen that Mrs Merkel, by making one statement that nobody will be refused entry to Germany, has let in literally millions of migrants. And are we able to stop that? Did we have any influence on that?
Do you support NATO?
Of course I do.
Right,
yeah.
OK, but do you agree that if the United Kingdom were to leave the European Union, that France and Germany would seek to build up European defence structures which would be in competition to NATO?
Well, I can tell you that what the European Union wants to do is to have one single seat in NATO, which is going to be the European Union, not the 28 individual seats.
Well, there we are. That's my point.
But that's their intention. Do we really want to be part of that? Do they want to give up our seat on NATO in order to...
let's just pick up then on the question about, you said about Germany opening its doors to 1 million or so migrants. But Frank Gardner said again that actually the biggest threat is homegrown potential terrorists here, rather than an unknown quantity that may be smuggled in through a migrant wave.
2 of the people that blew themselves up in Paris in the sports stadium were there on forged Syrian passports. And I was reading an article this morning
But not
that
the
said
majority were
that
EU
the
nationals.
article which said there are, Interpol knows of at least 250,000 fake passports in circulation, which has got to be the tip of an iceberg. And Greece and Italy are seen as industrial producers of faked passports in the European Union. So if somebody gets into the European Union on a fake passport or acquires one, we're powerless to actually stop them
But I'm afraid
coming
you're not
across our
addressing the
borders.
issue. You've made reference to 2 Syrian passports. I understood there was only 1 Syrian passport found at one of the scenes of the crime and the
that
attack.
was certainly the
I
one
read
that
two.
The majority were EU nationals. So what would you do about those EU nationals?
We also talked about the...
He's not answering a single question.
You talked about the quality of our intelligence services, which I agree with. They're the ones that have actually done a terrific job here. If we knew things about European citizens which made us suspect that they could be involved in terrorism, under the current rules, we can't stop them coming into the country because they have right of entry.
But under Gerard, we need to, intelligence sharing will only come about.
this is the other thing that the
Intelligence sharing,
EU wants to build its own intelligence
intelligence
service.
sharing will only come about if we are full and active members of the European Union.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.